That was a weird intro. Also with that React and GraphQL thing, but I think my slides are saying that. Cool. So yeah, also I was sitting over there for the sole reason of watching Tomasz and whether he's actually doing the live demo. I have trust issues, so I have to see whether he's actually typing. I think he did a really great job at pretending. All right, so today I really want to talk about something that I'm really passionate about. And if you've been at the workshop earlier, Imran over there has given an excellent workshop today about how to use GraphQL and React. So we do a lot of React and GraphQL at Formidable where we work. But before I get into that, I have been told you should always start a good meetup talk with a picture of yourself when you were little. So this is me at Legoland, because I gave this talk first at the Lego group in London. Not so topical now, but anyway. So yeah, hi, I'm Phil, once again. I work for Formidable. I am from London, from the London office. Our other main office is in Seattle, but we have various other offices. Apply for a job. I heard it's great. So at Formidable, we're really passionate about GraphQL, and we've been using it more and more in recent projects. And what we like about it is that we can take any kind of customer requirements as a consultancy. We can take all of these types they want to define, and we can spec out what kind of data we need to consume in the app. And GraphQL makes this really simple. We just define a schema, and then later on, when we write a query, we get exactly what we asked for, which GraphQL is really great at. So a lot of clients have actually been approaching us and asking us whether we want to implement GraphQL for them in the app. And can someone bring some water, please? I'm very sorry. And at the same time, we really like GraphQL because it makes it simpler for us to build the app. We can deliver a product faster to the client. Everyone's happy. Everyone wins. And I'm not here to talk about GraphQL on the server side today, but I'm here to talk about the, in my opinion, underappreciated part, and that is GraphQL clients. Especially GraphQL clients and React. Because what seems simple when you approach it from the viewpoint of building a REST API becomes quite complex when you're dealing with GraphQL, because suddenly you want to automate a couple of different things, like you want to optimize, thank you. You want to optimize caching, you want to optimize how different things are fetched and when they're fetched, and you want to deliver that data to the UI, so to the user as fast as possible. So in GraphQL, we often dictate that output of the API using that query input. And I'm very sorry if I'm skipping over this. But for different parts of the UI, we're always asking for a specific set of data. We don't get less data than that. We don't get more data than that. We'd like to reuse as much data as possible across the entire app so that we don't have to overfetch and let the user wait for their site and wait for the next page to load. So all of this is really great when you have a schema with different types that has some clear-cut starts and ends and different ways to fetch this data. But what makes that really work is the client's cache. So whatever GraphQL client you're using ensures that you can basically just write your queries, and at the end of the day, you will always get the fastest possible request, more or less. And when we looked at what GraphQL clients are currently popular now over a year ago, and this is very much still the same thing, we looked at Relay and we looked at Apollo, which are, to my knowledge, the only GraphQL clients that are used in most of the apps. And what I mean by that is that Apollo is actually used in an insanely and vastly quicker growing number of apps than ever before. And Relay, which is Facebook's GraphQL client, is constantly used by a fair number of apps, not growing as quickly, but that makes that problem even worse. So when we look at what GraphQL clients you typically use in React, Apollo client, being a great library, is currently in the lead. On the other hand, what I see is Apollo is the only GraphQL client that people really want to use and that people are really going to use. And I find that to be a big problem. So when you're a pessimist like me, you see that kind of graph. you think something must be wrong here, something must be off. So if you compare that to kind of some backend libraries and backend offerings around GraphQL, it becomes even weirder. So if you just try to list out some services around GraphQL that exist, some companies that are working with GraphQL, there are a lot that are working on the backend. So just mentioning a couple, for instance, Prisma here from Berlin, quite local, or their project GraphQL Playground, or entirely different companies like OneGraph. You can list out a lot of these, and it's just an arbitrary list. But if you think about GraphQL on the client, there's really just Apollo. And there's nothing wrong with Apollo. It's an awesome library. We use it a lot, and we are big fans of their work. But what I'm missing is experimentation. So what I'm really missing is, if I see only having one library to do a specific thing, I kind of think that there's not enough experimentation going on. Because surely, if you have something like GraphQL, which mainly starts on the back end and is then consumed by a front end, surely there's not just one way to consume it, there's not just one way to use this API. And if we look at the Apollo ecosystem, while there are a lot of libraries around Apollo and how you can use them, there really isn't that much that really shows you some experiments, what you can do. It's fairly standard. You have some caching implementations. You have the so-called links, which basically are different transport layers and where Apollo gets its data from. You have the client itself as the manager of all things. And for React, you obviously have some kind of wrapper around it, React Apollo. And speaking before about how a GraphQL client is really important, ensuring that you're delivering this data quickly, this becomes even more of a problem because now you have a lot of invisible magic in that cache, for instance, and you don't really know what's going on, and there is only this one cache library. And I did include an example of an alternative to Apollo's own cache, which is called Apollo Cache Hermes. But when I looked at it, judging from the issue board, it never really got far. So it turns out it's hard to build a cache. So what a certain person did at our company, Ken Wheeler, when he looked at it, was he tried to approach the problem head on. And he wrote the simplest GraphQL client that he could. And it's called urql. And the ideas behind urql are fairly simple. So he just wanted something that just throws away all the ideas around Apollo. Fair enough. He wanted to make the most minimal library as possible because I think he only wanted to spend a couple of days on it. But what also kind of became the goal after a while is we want to make it extensible and we want to make it experimentation friendly because Apollo's libraries being quite limiting and their code bases being quite large at the same time. And what that kind of developed into is urql itself. And when you look at it, speaking in the beginning of how the cache being the most important thing, I have to admit that by default, urql doesn't do a whole lot of caching. So the whole idea around urql was, what if we just send a query, we just hash the entire query that you've asked for, and then when you get some data back, you just put that data into the cache, and you remember the hash, so the query that you've used for it. And then when you change some data with a mutation on the server, what you do is you hash that again, you get back some data again, and then you compare what types you had. And all of the data that you cached previously that has same types that have been changed, presumably in a mutation, are going to be thrown away. So it's more of a document-based query cache than anything. So, oh. That's why I wanted to take a sip. So having talked about the cache now, if it doesn't do anything that Apollo does, if it doesn't actually take advantage of the things that you can do with GraphQL, the caching stuff that you can do, then why do we have urql? And the answer to that is, if I wouldn't have skipped to that slide already, that third point. We wanted to make something that is more extensible, that is more community friendly. Because I can't really write a cache for GraphQL, and I assume Ken doesn't know much about writing a cache for GraphQL. But what we believe in is if we build everything else and we just leave the part in the middle, then anyone can try out their ideas, and at some point in the future, maybe we're going to end up with a better cache. That's how open source works, right? Okay. And what we've come up with is a fairly similar system to what Apollo is already doing, which are basically what I've peeked at earlier, Apollo links. So since they have the concept of sending these requests with different packages, we've basically gone ahead and have done the same. And we've basically come up with the same pattern. You have some kind of GraphQL query, which we wrap up in an operation. And you have a chain of these kind of functions that take these operations and then eventually call each other, and you get an observable back. So what then happens is you have this kind of nested structure of operations, and you get back some observables, and you've sent your request. And all of these are separate functions. So if you wanted to extend this functionality, you just write another wrapping function. So you can add it on to urql, and you're done. And this is very similar to what Apollo does. So again, nothing new. And skipping that. What we've then done is we've done the obvious thing. Since we are stealing so many ideas from Apollo, you can now just use Apollo links with urql. Got that right way around. And the last thing is really what's left is how do we approach that caching? How do we make that customizable? Because that is the thing that we can't build ourselves. And what Apollo has is a separate Apollo cache package that wraps that around the client. And we thought we could just add that as another observable just to make this more confusing. But really, that means that we're wrapping up the entire caching logic in just a single function. So the library, as it's now going to be, is going to have that same logic that you see before of storing something in the cache and then later on invalidating it. But a single function that receives all operations is deciding how that happens and when that happens. So it sees a query, caches that query, sees a mutation, and looks at what kind of cached query needs to be invalidated. And what that all boils down to is that we basically want to make urql super customizable. So if you wanted to just find out in 5 minutes how you can, I don't know, make your entire app slower at a set timeout of 5 seconds, I've heard that's the magic number, you should be able to do that in just about 5 minutes without having looked at urql before. So I really don't like seeing that Apollo has a lot of packages that are just their own and that are basically just packages that you actually all need to get the minimum experience. And I think with urql being a very small code base, maybe you can change that. Maybe we can change that together. And just to achieve that, we want to bring the next version of urql here as soon as possible. And these slides are actually, as of this week, out of date, because we're going to skip this version 0.3, which was backwards compatible. And we're going to go straight to version 1, which is published as this package on the second line today, and hopefully in a stable release by, I don't know, in a month or so. Yeah, and that's about it.